Hello everyone, it's I, the Helldivers lore guy, back to give you all the information about the Terminid species that you didn't know. Let's get right into it. So without further ado, actually, with further ado, I have some things I want to mention first. This is about to be like a 1.5 page of absolutely useless information, so if you want to skip today's Yapsesh, I'd recommend you go look at the timestamps that I hopefully put in. First off, why am I making this video? For views, obviously, and money. I'm monetized, you know that. But also, content on the Helldivers lore is a little bit sparse, to say the least. And the stuff that is out there just kind of skims over Helldivers 1 and only gets information from the game's wiki. I should point out, the wiki only lists information from the game's encyclopedia and leaves everything else out, and there's a lot of stuff there. Fortunately, I am here to provide you with that information. And no, I'm not just doing it to flex the fact that I played Helldivers before it was cool. Except that's exactly what I'm doing. I played the first game. I have the pre-order armor. I have the special service medal roll. This is my game, and nobody can. Actually, they sometimes use other sources in the form of comments on Reddit that are completely made up. There are so many misconceptions out there that the community just takes as fact, and a lot of these come from people who just misremembered what they had seen when they played the first game like 5 years ago. Don't get me wrong, I can understand. I actively played the first game, and even I misremember some things. Helldivers 1 has got to be the game that causes the most Mandela effects I've ever seen. But I at least went back to check on it. Some of these misconceptions are just theories that people believe are true. I mean, they could be true, but they still aren't definitively confirmed, so they should be labeled as just a theory. And other misconceptions are just flat out wrong. Let's give you some examples that have been going around. The Terminids were a species of peaceful, intelligent, and sentient insectoid life forms that lived happily peaceful times in their colonies until they encountered humanity. At first, they greeted us with open talons. Wrong! Where did this come from? There is nothing to indicate that. Sure, it could technically be true, but it's like the least likely of all the options. What probably happened is that the bugs are a hive-minded species of animals who run mostly on instincts, and when we encountered them, being as instincts don't tend to like competition very much, they probably didn't take too kindly to our expansion rivaling their own. Whoever came up with this must be confusing them with the Illuminate, because they actually did do this, but I'll get to that in another video. Another idea I've seen is that the Terminids could speak.
It was also reported that they are capable of speaking, but due to a language barrier, no one from Super Earth can tell what exactly they were saying, at least in the beginning.
Jesse, what the fuck are you talking about?
This kind of goes with the other one. I mean, they can clearly communicate with each other in the way that ant colonies communicate, maybe even dolphins, but it's not speaking in the way that you would think, and even if it was, they definitely wouldn't want to talk to us. There are others out there that are related to different topics, so whenever I find a theory that I'm jealous of because I didn't come up with it, I'll be sure to address it in the video it's related to by dismantling it with my superior facts and logic and actual in-game evidence. There are also some ground rules I need to lay out regarding how I'm going to tackle the Helldivers lore, and this is the important part of the Yapsesh. First of all, there's not much to the Helldivers lore as of right now, especially in the first game, so some things I will be talking about are some theories and conclusions I have drawn up using the evidence I will be showing. The evidence I use is in-game evidence such as text and visual observations, as well as official stuff from the developers such as store descriptions and interviews. I also recognize that some of my conclusions are likely not the intent of Arrowhead, as a matter of fact they're definitely not, and don't worry, it will be clear what is a theory of mine and what is actually factual in the game. Second, you Razorkin. Whenever contradictions come up between the two games, we're going to be taking the second game as canon, as this is when they started taking the story more seriously, and this is when it'll be most up to date. There hasn't been any direct contradictions yet, but some things are a little finicky and weird. This is not to discard anything from Helldivers 1, of course. It still has a lot of cool stuff that could be talked about, just doing it for lore purposes, series-wide. And finally, I reject the notion that the world we see in the game is not accurate, but is rather a false, filtered view of the world our Helldivers see thanks to the brainwashing and propaganda. This notion is, quite frankly, lame and boring. Like watching an epic movie and the main character just wakes up and the plot twist is that it was all a dream. I've seen many people try and argue this yet, but when I bring up things that would portray your favorite faction in a negative light, don't try it. Oh, just one more thing. I know you goobers are gonna be out there in the comments section typing things like, "That's him, democracy officer, and reported to the Ministry of Truth." I don't have an issue with the roleplay, but this is your chance to appreciate and discuss the game's universe from an outside perspective. Besides, if any of you try to comment up, right, down, 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 I'm gonna hit you with a left, right, down, and right, and destroy any argument that you have. Okay, Yapsesh over. Let's talk about the bugs. We should probably start off in the beginning, that being how the concept was conceived in the first place. The Terminid species is a hive-minded collective, a part of a caste system with different ranks similar to ants or termites. This idea of a galaxy-spanning hive mind is clearly inspired from other works of science fiction, such as the Zerg from StarCraft, the Terminids from Warhammer 40k, and of course, the original that inspired all of them, the Arachnids from Starship Troopers. Although in Helldivers' case, it's more so the movie version rather than the pseudo-Arachnids from the novel, being as they aren't wielding laser guns and flying in spaceships. That would make, like, the entirety of the bug divers quit. Oh, and nuclear landmines, this was also a thing. Now, there is one thing that sets the Terminids apart from the rest, and no one is talking about this. I've seen count them, two other people on the internet, and like Discord and such, mention this outside of me bringing it up, and it's that the Terminids are not arachnids like you may think. They're actually crustaceans. Just look at them. They're quite literally lobsters. They're lobsters, and that's their leader. That's the Lobster King. Yes, that's right. The bugs are actually water bugs, but on land. They are crustaceans. Literally in the game, they're referred to as such. And if you are, for some reason, unsure what crustaceans are, they include, but are not limited to, crabs, isopods, lobsters, shrimp, krill, and crayfish. Now, obviously, there are other traits that the bugs possess, even in the first game, that aren't seen on our crustaceans, but it is, fiction. I remember hearing it described that they possess traits that are found across all arthropods, and those of course include insects, arachnids, and also crustaceans. Of course, why tell you and not show you in this thorough look at the bugs in Helldivers 1 that I shall now perform. As per usual in this series, we don't know much that happened before the first game. Or after, for that matter. However, the history of the Terminids seems pretty cut and dry from what I was able to find. Finding specific dates in the first game is always weird, and they often seem contradictory to itself. The community can't even agree on the date of the Second Galactic War, whether it's 2224 or 2184. I'm leaning more towards 2184. The only definitive dates we were given was that the first game takes place during 2084, solely for the 1984 reference, and the Alcubierre Drive was invented in the early 2030s. That's probably when interstellar travel began for humanity. And there was some law passed in Congress in 2079, but that's irrelevant. The encyclopedia says that the war has raged on for 40 years, which seems to indicate that the war started in 2044, which in that case we only have 2 decades left. However, another interpretation is that that is the total amount of time for the war, and that the date 2084 is actually the beginning or somewhere in the middle and not the end of the war. And then of course you have the stuff on the date of the declaration of war against the cyborgs and discovery of the Illuminate, but we'll save those for another time. All of this is contained within Helldivers 1, by the way, but they put no one in charge of this stuff. So the evidence I found which tells us about the earliest events that is related to the bugs is a bit of dialogue from the scientist lady that she has a chance of giving you when you're orbiting a bug planet, stating this: all of the bug planets have large quantities of fossil fuel. This is something that was noticed just before the outbreak of the first Crustacean War. Okay. We have a few things to unpack here. Bug planets having oil is obvious, and if you somehow are not aware, the Terminids decompose rapidly into a type of oil called E710. More on that later. The big thing here is the first Crustacean War. This indicates that Super Earth has been at war with the Terminids before the first Galactic War. Secondly, the fact that it's called the First Crustacean War indicates that there was at least a second Crustacean War. We could also conclude that the reasons for Super Earth to be involved in these wars, if you can call an invasion of a seemingly unintelligent, hive-minded traditional war, was to secure these oil reserves, with them being unaware that the oil came from the bugs themselves at the time. The mention of securing resources while showing oil rigs in this game's intro sequence supports the idea that this was the primary purpose of the Helldivers and the military in general before the Galactic War, aside from executing dissidents and putting down rebellions, of course. Anywho, that's pretty much everything about the bugs before the first Galactic War, but, oh, just one Why do I keep never mind. The technician lady from the second game has dialogue that describes the celebrations that occur during All Heroes Eve when she was a child, with the adults dressing up as bugs for the kids, and then a reenactment of the Battle of Liberty Peak to finish it off. From this, I'm 90% sure that the Battle of Liberty Peak was fought against the bugs. The description of the DP-53 Savior of the Free armor says that it's a faithful recreation of the armor that was worn during that battle, being that the armor is described as a replica and the fabled nature behind the Battle of Liberty Peak. I reckon that this was a very important event that took place early in Super Earth's history. So maybe during the Crustacean Wars? In reality, it was probably the first Galactic War and really could have taken place at any point in time up to the second game. But anywho, on to the first Galactic War. So, there are news articles that show up upon declaration of war against the three factions in the first game, being as the game just runs the war and it continues to loop every time it ends, explaining the reason why Super Earth went to war with them. And here, I want to lay some even more groundwork for future videos. Let me explain to you the concept of justification versus reason, as explained to me by my American history professor. Basically, it boils down to justification being the reason given by the nation for war, and reason being the actual real reason for going to war that they don't really want to say out loud. Now, the justification could be a reason to fight, and maybe the reason why many people would want the war, but it's not the primary one, and by itself doesn't really justify the war. Historical example, the Spanish-American War. Reason? Oh no, our ship blew up. That was in no way self-inflicted. It had to have been the Spanish, and besides, they've been oppressing the poor little Cubans by, did I say the poor little Cubans by putting them in concentration camps for years. Reasons? Those islands do look nice this time of year. So Super Earth provides justifications and has reasons for each of the three enemy factions in the first game, which I will go over for each of their own videos. For the bugs, justification was clear. The bugs have become a plague upon the galaxy and must be completely eradicated. I mean, seems reasonable enough when you think about it. They have been shown that they are clearly an invasive species, harming every ecosystem that they encounter, slowly terraforming the planet into one that is perfect for their own species. And besides, but after the Crustacean Wars, the bugs are probably pretty pissed off at us, so we might as well stop their expansion now before it's too late and they completely overtake us. As for the reason, oh, we know the reason. It should be noted that the article also shows that at the time of declaration of war, it was already public knowledge that the bugs decomposed into oil. Dr. Hank Plogue explains that although it would be beneficial to exploit this for our own gain, it's not worth the risk of letting these monsters continue to live. Now, before I explain what happened to the bugs at the end of the war, here's a quick look at every single bug unit in the game. Also, you can look this up on the wiki, but I have some exclusive knowledge. This section probably added like 10 minutes of unneeded video time, but you know what? I don't care. Hello, welcome to Helldivers 1. Yeah, that's right, you've been lied to. It was a third-person shooter this whole time. We also have a sword. First up, Scout, your most basic of units. As you can see, you got some lobster inspiration with the antenna and the face in the front. A little bit of isopod in the back. These guys also call in reinforcements by screaming and releasing pheromones, and they died a one-shot from literally everything in the game. Also, here's a scout inside the doctor's water tank. Here's a better angle on the scout. Next up, the Vanguard. It's literally the exact same as the scout, but with wings now. This doesn't really make them more difficult, as they tend to jump right in front of you before releasing their pheromones, which makes it a little easier to spot them and kill them before they can call in reinforcement. Additionally, you can see some insect inspirations with their wings. Eventually, these guys completely replace the scout in higher difficulties. Warrior is their basic fighting unit, very lobster looking if you ask me. Interestingly, all of the right claws that we're going to see going forward on these units have 3 fingers. I think that's an actual term for them. Now, I don't think we have anything like these on Earth, although I haven't looked very hard on the internet, so you biologists can discuss this in the comments. I'm just showing, not telling. It doesn't appear to be the case in the cover art, so I don't know what's up with that either. Also, here's the claw on the tank. When wounded and beginning to bleed out, they will be sent into a sort of enraged mode with increased movement and attack speed, outpacing even you. The elites are up next, and that's their actual name. They are bigger versions of the warriors. They have medium armor on their sides, which usually isn't an issue because most primaries have medium armor penetration or an upgrade to get it, but for the rare cases that you don't, you have to aim for their center. They also have more health, as expected, and probably do more damage, although I didn't actually test this. When damaged, these guys will be sent into the same enraged state constant running at you while bleeding out. Eventually these guys will completely replace the warrior on higher difficulties. The stalker in this game was just a scout unit, never spawned during a reinforced wave, just randomly across the map. It will run at you while cloaked and start attacking you. It didn't do much damage, but the real kicker was the effect applied. Yes, it does seem bile was in the first game, although in much more limited quantities. The slowing acid effect deals a little bit of damage over time, but the bad part was the slowing, which is way worse for you in this game. When damaged, they will run away when cloaked, but they had so little health that dealing with these guys when they were alone was quite trivial. Clearly, there is much more of a praying mantis vibe going on here, and it also spreads out its wings and shakes them a bunch to appear bigger and more menacing. The Shadow is the bug's super elite scout unit that only spawned on difficulties higher than Helldive. It is pretty much the exact same as the Stalker, and it completely replaced the Stalker. The wings appear to be a little bit bigger, and the skin is a little darker, but the main thing is that this one could also release pheromones and call in for reinforcements. Shooting it during the animation before it is released will interrupt this and make them run away, but on difficulty 15, that's 3 higher than Helldive, by the way. So many of these guys spawn that a bug reach is pretty much inevitable. The tank is this game's version of the Charger. They were a heavily armored unit that needed anti-tank in order to kill, with the exception of their weak point, which is their exposed back. They had some close-range melee attacks, but the main one was a charge. All of these one-shot you, by the way. There's clearly some isopod inspiration going on here, and I will tell you that their exposed rear curves down and looks very much like the tail of a hermit crab. Now we have the big boy, the infamous behemoth. Trust me, I got enough footage of these goobers. They are tanks, but bigger.
Bigger! Garmadon is a ninja!
And have 0 weak spot. Yep, you had better take an anti-tank stratagem of some sort, else you were completely screwed. The flamethrower and the chemical thrower could also work too, I guess. Also, the cover art depicts them as this, so take that as you will. Also, in this water tank is what I believe to be a behemoth head, in case you guys wanted to see it for some reason. Yes, the infamous Impaler. You bug divers have no idea what it was like. This is the one enemy that has yet to make an appearance of some sort in the second game. Oh, would you look at that? Trailer dropped right when I was editing this video. I'll talk about it later. The fun little guys have spikes on their face that will one-shot you if you're too close, but their signature attack is from when you are far away. They bury their spikes into the ground, and the tentacles will come out of the ground near Helldivers to molest them. These deal massive damage and will kill you if you're not already at full health, and will probably kill you once you're downed. They are really annoying to deal with because they can often attack from off-screen when you're not sure where exactly they are. When their tentacles are protruding from the ground, you can actually shoot them and it'll cause that to retract back into the ground. The Impaler is also completely immobile during this attack, and its face is exposed to small arms fire. Attacking its face will also cause the Impaler to retract its tentacles to protect itself. By the way, those black spots are the eyes. And now we get to the head honcho, the Brood Commander. You guys may think I'm crazy, but they were really scary back then. These big black crustaceans were complete bullet sponges with the amount of health that they had, acting as even bigger versions of the elites. Their attacks hit hard, and they also were the only other normal bug that applied acid. So if it caught you without a jump pack, a stunning weapon, or a slowing weapon, then you are as good as dead. And the worst part is, they also had the enraged states, making them extremely fast, and they still had a lot of health left. Fortunately, on lower difficulty missions, they only spawned as assassination targets, and on higher difficulty missions, they spawned rarely. But on max difficulty, they were the basic infantry. The encyclopedia mentions that Super Earth believed these to be the bugs that acted as generals in charge of forward operations, hence their name. The enlarged head of theirs and their extreme rarity on lower difficulties also seems to support that. I'll also quickly look at the bug structures on the maps themselves. The first game didn't really have outposts or side objectives or really anything. The only thing that came close was the destroy target objectives, which didn't have guards or anything. The only enemies that spawned were the patrols and scouts. Looking at the nest objectives themselves, you can see in the first game they looked pretty different. Reminds me of barnacles. Also, throughout the maps, you can see eggs and little nests and just kind of stuff scattered randomly throughout the planet. Alright, the moment you've all been waiting for. The samples you get from the bugs are in fact larvae of some sort. Oh, and hive lords, I guess. These are the guys that canonically dig all of the tunnels for the bug hive. However, there isn't actually any mention if they control the hives as queens or not, so there could be more bug casts we haven't seen in the games. They had 4 attacks, 2 attacks that would come straight out of the ground and either spit some acid that would kill you really fast if caught in the puddle, or spread acid in a wide area around it that would simply apply the effect, which was its least deadly attack. If you are directly above it when it comes out of the ground, you would die instantly, and not even my infinite health cheat could save me. The other two involved a quick peek above the surface to bite someone, also insta-killing them, and then some sort of charge where it peeked above the ground and went after someone, also instant-killing them. Also, during the fight, other bugs will spawn in with increasing threat depending on the boss's health, up to brood commanders and impalers. Thankfully, no tanks or behemoths though. What is really interesting about their appearance is that they are the one bug enemy that actually isn't inspired by crustaceans, or arthropods for that matter. They are actually bobbit worms, which explains a lot. You can look up these guys yourself, but what I will say is that they are pretty scary, really long, will hunt fish many times their size, supposedly their mandibles are also venomous, and apparently, as a defense mechanism, they will split their segmented bodies into multiple parts, and if those parts can survive and regrow their important segments like the head or tail, you now have two genetically identical bobbit worms. So imagine when they are added into Helldivers 2, they could split up like the Eater of Worlds. Wow, that was 3 pages of script I absolutely didn't need to include. Anyways, let's finish things up for the first Galactic War, shall we? Another possible conversation with the scientist lady tells us the bugs far outnumber man. I'm just making it clear in case no one picked up on that. The bugs are probably organized as a hive species, which is kind of obvious, but it's never technically outright told to us. The encyclopedia for the bug entry as a faction says that they are sentient beings, or at least the hive is. It doesn't make them as smart as humans, but they are smarter than, like, a jellyfish. The entry also says that Super Earth had no idea how they managed space travel at this time, but the second game has pretty much already confirmed that they spread planet to planet with spores, which are a thing that fungi do. Now, I have seen theories that the Terminids have a symbiotic relationship with other species, which would explain this. I'll just chalk it up to sci-fi BS. The two privates, as you walk into the ship, who both have the same pool of dialogue, can mention that they have seen on the news that if you touch a bug, your arm will become infected and fall off eventually. Some might chalk this up to nothing more than propaganda, which, to be fair, it probably is. But being as the bugs already spit acid on you, the idea of them having poisonous skin isn't too far-fetched. Now, let's talk about their homeworld, Kepler Prime. Kepler Prime is a large desert planet with rings orbiting it. On the ground, it looks just like any other desert planet, but with the yellow-green haze in the atmosphere. Now, this is because the developers just used the same assets from other desert planets and put the Mexican filter over it. The second game mentioned that the Meridian super colony is what Kepler Prime actually looked like. We can't really call the homeworld a super colony, so let's use some better terminology from other sci-fi and call it a hive world instead. Now, there's one more thing that I would like to mention, and it is really out there. The scientist lady, actually I should just use her name, the one on my ship is called Dr. Savior, says that some desert planets have fields of a spice-like substance that is said to prolong the life of the user by centuries. Now, this is obviously supposed to be a haha funny Dune reference, but think about it. Kepler Prime is a desert world. Now, I'm thinking that I'm not crazy, shut up! She also mentions the side effect is violent mutations. Where have we heard that before? Yeah, exactly. It's all connected. This spice could have been the thing that gave the Terminids their traits to decompose rapidly into oil, right? Yeah. Now, I know that the spice in Dune came from the sandworms, but I don't think that this spice came from the Hive Lords because she doesn't specify bug desert planets, and there are desert planets across the galaxy. I know this theory is probably actually definitely not the case, but just maybe. Or perhaps I've been correct this entire time. So the war basically raged on for 40 years. I guess we can go with that number. In the second game, one of the random announcements from the PA system comes on and reminds the crew that the bugs killed 189 million Super Earth citizens in the first Galactic War. Except it specifically says the first intergalactic war, so I guess it took place across multiple galaxies now, even though only the Milky Way was actually mentioned. Anyways, it gives us that number and says that many of them were babies. Again, you could chalk this up to fake propaganda, especially the babies part, but that number of deaths seems pretty reasonable for, you know, a 40-year-long galactic war. And plus, you know, some of them probably were babies. I wouldn't expect the Terminids to think any more slaughtering human children than we do smashing their eggs. Anywho, the front against the bugs ends after we take their home planet of Kepler Prime.
We have exterminated the bugs. The Eastern Quadrant is liberated.
The news article that pops up tells us that the government has changed their mind. Senator John W. Killjoy explains to us that this would actually be best if we farmed the bugs for their oil to give us a more sustainable future, and that it just wouldn't be right to completely eradicate them. It then mentions that there were some minor concerns from people that letting the bugs live was a bad move. Interestingly enough, these people voicing their concerns are one of the few examples I could find of people disagreeing with the government and not being executed for it. Now we get into the interwar period. The Terminids were put into the Element 7 10 farms, and that's it. Well, there's a little bit more, but I'll talk about that during the game 2.
The bugs are back.
So, in the second game, the Terminids look a little bit different. However, this is explained in the game from the technician lady, mine is named Hagstrom. They changed after roughly 100 years of rapid evolution and genetic modification. I'm not going to go over every single unit this time because I assume most of you guys come from the second game, so I'll just go over the general differences between the two games. One of the first things that you will notice is they look less like crustaceans and more alien. Instead of a more rounded build for their claws and body, it's now sharp and jagged. Their claws are very long, not very useful to grab and move things, but it is effective at killing. It's almost like they changed to where they are less about hunting for the purpose of getting food for the hive and more about killing their enemies. You know, us. You can see this change in the basic infantry and scout units all the way up to the brood commanders. By observing how they can summon in warriors shows their purpose as field commander seems to be unchanged. The stalkers are white and actually have health now. For the chargers and the behemoth chargers, it seems they downscaled into a sleeker form compared to their tank ancestors. My guess is that this is a good way to reduce the amount of energy that their bodies would have to be used up carrying these massive forms. Interestingly enough, stalkers and brood commanders have lost their ability to spit acid on you. Instead, this is relegated to the hunters, as well as all of the bile units. The idea of Terminids that spew bile acid as dedicated units was unheard of in the first game. My guess is that the bile titans evolved the ability as a reaction to being exposed to furry art in the Helldivers Discord. We can also see behavior changes during the missions themselves. The Terminid strategic positions are more concentrated and organized. For example, all of the eggs are grouped together in defended nests instead of just being scattered about the entire map. They have the spore spewers that make it harder for the Helldivers to see while not affecting their own vision at all. Even their bug holes that they come up from are concentrated in defensible positions, which would make it more difficult for us to actually throw ordnance down there to damage the hive. It appears that the Terminids have changed in those 100 years for the sole purpose of waging war. This was the Terminid faction at the beginning of Helldivers 2, so what exactly is the deeper story here? Everything does seem pretty straightforward on what is going on, but after seeing all the propaganda, there surely has to be some sort of cover-up. Well, there is the illegal broadcast, obviously made by dissidents in order to try and spread messages that are against the government. We can see them saying that the bug menace is all the government's fault, it's all about the oil. I just remember finding it funny that when new players saw this and were like, oh my gosh, guys, huge revelation. Been about the oil this whole time. They break down into the oil. Oh, guys, flip E710, flip 710 upside down. It's all connected. And it's like, wow, sure figured it out, didn't you? It's not like the government's been open about this for the last century. So, unless the government has been lying to everyone except for the military for the past 100 years about the Terminids producing oil, even though they had announced it on the news, the fact that we were using the Terminids for the oil is not where the conspiracy lies. And besides, I'm pretty sure the population would support exploiting an alien race they were otherwise willing to exterminate completely. So no, it goes a little bit deeper than a basic fact about Terminid biology. But we're on the right track. Remember that genetic modification part? Yeah, that's it. That's the cover-up. The actual conspiracy is that for the past 100 years, scientists have been genetically altering the Terminid species in order to produce the maximum quantity of oil, and probably bile too. These alterations have made them more aggressive and much deadlier until it got to a point that the Terminid ranchers couldn't handle them anymore, which led to a mass breach and containment on galactic scales. There have been no remarks in the second game on how the Terminids even broke out, because that is what the government is actually trying to hide. So it technically is about the oil, as the broadcast says, it just goes a little bit deeper. So that covers the parts before the first game, but of course some events have happened since then. If you played the game on launch day, which, not to brag or anything, I was there, I have the pre-order, you would remember Operation Valiant Enclosure, an event that spans multiple major orders that eventually led to the introduction of Termicide on the barrier planets. Termicide is some sort of toxin that only targets members of the Terminid species while doing no harm to all other organisms. I would like to add that a toxin killing only the bugs, as well as hot gases coming from the bug holes, are probably inspired from Starship Troopers, the novel. As we all know, this worked initially, almost completely eradicating the bugs and the planets they were deployed to, but it eventually backfired by causing more genetic mutations that increased Terminid reproduction rate and introduced the Streakers, which I might add, there were no flying units in the first game. I don't know why people keep thinking that. Anywho, after the Termicide goes wrong, there's a major order to deactivate the Terminid control system on 3 of the 4 planets it was deployed on. So let's talk about Meridia. Of the 4 barrier planets, Meridia was the one that saw the greatest population growth of the Terminids, so much so that that it completely changed the surface of the planet in a very short amount of time. It was described as being quite similar to what Kepler Prime was in the first Galactic War, as previously mentioned. Now, when looking at the surface of Meridia, I actually don't have any footage because I was gone during the biggest major order to date. But fortunately, I was able to steal some footage from this VTuber right here, except he doesn't have the original unedited footage anymore. As well as these images I stole from the Helldivers wiki, who stole them from the leaks subreddit for some reason. As you can see, the entire surface is covered up in this material that was probably made by the Terminids in the same fashion that wasps spit out pulp to make their nests. The atmosphere is the same yellow-green color that Kepler Prime was, which is probably the ideal gas mixture and temperature for the growth of Terminids. We can also see some trees left over from before because Meridia was not a desert planet like Kepler Prime. So essentially what we can take away from this is that this planet is the ultimate end goal of the Hive for pretty much the entire galaxy. Eventually, we do destroy Meridia by using the dark fluid to turn it into a black hole, and it's at this point that the topic of Meridia shifts to something else that has no relevance to this video whatsoever. That pretty much catches up to everything about the Terminids to date. We did get the new Hive Buster objective that lets us hear some noises in the Hive. People think it's Hive Lords, and they could be right. We do see dead Hive Lord skeletons, which are actually accurate to how they looked in the first game. I'm sure that Super Earth probably exterminated the Hive Lords because there was no actual feasible way of containing them in farms. There were a few more things I wanted to quickly touch on before the end of the video. Where is Kepler Prime? I do have some theories on this. I think that homeworlds could be a feature that just hasn't been added to the game yet, which would explain why Kepler Prime and Squam by Shrine are completely absent from the map, and then the Automaton homeworld would just be something else. Or perhaps Kepler Prime just won't be the Terminid homeworld in the second game, and the explanation for that would be it was just rendered uninhabitable or something and they acquired a new one. I don't know what else there is. I guess we can talk about the music. Now, I'm no music theory expert. I played the trombone a little bit in middle school, but I will try my best here. The tracks for the two games are composed by different people. Johan Lindgren for the first and Wilbert Rajet II for the second. Both of them seem to really like each other's work, so that's also nice. Helldivers 1 had 4 bug tracks. A lower intensity song that would play in difficulties 1 to 4, then I got more intense on 5 to 8, and then 9+. The beginning of the low difficulty music has a sense of mystery, and I guess it can be a little bit unsettling. It would make me think, oh man, what are these alien creatures that I'm fighting? The intensity then picks up a little bit for the next highest difficulties, but the one that I actually care about is the difficulty 9+1. It keeps all the motifs from the previous versions with much higher intensity. During the part with all the violins, it feels like an unwinnable battle against a far superior foe, but then the horns kick in and you realize that this is your battle to win, that those back at home are depending on you, so you better not fail. And then it plays both of the parts at once. Hey, look at that. Listen to that. The Hive Lord has its own theme and does not waste any time building up because you yourself have no time to waste when fighting this thing. It definitely does fit as a boss theme. I think the best part is when the high difficulty theme comes in. It just feels really good when you hear that playing. Oh, and just one more thing. He uploaded a mix of the 3 difficulties a couple months ago and it's pretty good. The Terminid theme from Helldivers 2, it's not my favorite. It definitely feels more cinematic, like an 80s sci-fi movie. The good parts are really good and the rest, it definitely captures the feeling in-game of fighting an entire swarm of hive-minded animals, especially the parts with the violins or whatever those string instruments are, which I do really like. I would say it feels more like a theme for the Terminids, while the first game it was more like a theme for the Helldivers while they are fighting the bugs. And apparently there's some dynamic music because the Bile Titan has its own track when fighting it. For the longest time I didn't actually know this until I gave it a listen on YouTube and I was like, yep, that's it, alright. This part cranks up the intensity into ultra cinematic mode. Overall, and this goes true for all of the enemy themes, the second game tracks feel a lot more sinister and threatening, while the first game is a lot more heroic and hopeful. If there was one major theme for Helldivers, that would be it. Heroism in the face of adversity. And don't take my word for it, Pilasset said it himself in this decade-old interview. Anywho, there is one major bombshell that I've been saving for the end of this video. This would change absolutely everything you knew about Helldivers. This spine-tingling, genre-defining, universe-shattering revelation comes from none other than Greg. Of course, I voice cracked on. Now, I know what you're thinking. Beto, you're insane. There's no way that's not— Shut up. It is. Shut up. Let me explain. I too thought it was just a little Easter egg only to be found on the pits of Meridia. But then I remembered something. Starship Troopers, the movie 3. Now, I actually didn't watch this, but I have Wikipedia. It is revealed that the leader of the Arachnids was a quote-unquote god bug that they worshipped. It was a pretty large bug, I would say. The movie had like a whole plot about the Sky Marshal being brainwashed into worshipping him, and his name's Behemocoidal, by the way. And then eventually Rico and his boys win the day by blowing up the planet. Also, the Federation realized the reason why the Arachnids were such dedicated fighters was actually due to their religious fervor, and they wanted some of that too, so they decided to adopt Christianity as the official state religion. Yes, this is real. And since Rico is a general in the Extermination game, that means it takes place after this film, meaning that this game is actually about an epic space crusade in the name of our Lord. So yeah, the idea of a god bug isn't exactly new, and especially since Helldivers takes so much inspiration from Starship Troopers. Basically what I'm saying is that it's not impossible that the Terminid War is actually a galactic jihad in the name of Grey, a great holy war for the bugs to spread. I'm not crazy. Remember the spice? Remember the spice? Yeah, it all came full circle, didn't it? Man, this video was a lot longer than expected, and the next one's probably going to be even longer. The relationship between Super Earth and the Terminid species can be summed up as a very vital one. For over a century, ever since the first Crustacean War, humans have been exploiting them for the resources that they break down into. They are the lifeblood of the Federation, which makes Terminids the most important enemy faction in these both games. For humans, they are just animals. Less than animals even. We still rely on animals to maintain the delicate balance in our ecosystems. Containing the Terminids will only make things better. From the Terminid perspective, it has been horrific. For millions of years, they have been the apex species, spreading throughout the stars uncontested until they met their first real competition, the indomitable human spirit. It must have been a great shock for the Hive when they realized they were not the only ones in this universe. However, if the Terminids were to represent one key thing, it would be Super Earth's greatest mistakes. Attacking the cyborgs and the Illuminate were not really mistakes. They won both of those wars in such a way that there was no reason to expect them to become threats again. But the bugs, their desire to make fuel and probably bile acid more efficiently, clouded their judgment, and they went too far with the genetic modification, allowing widespread outbreaks across the colonies housing E710 farms. They made yet another mistake shortly after, trying to find an easy solution to the problem, but they ended up making things much worse. After all, the deputy game director himself said that we will witness Super Earth dig itself into deeper and deeper holes, and to fix the most recent problem, they may have made their greatest mistake yet. But that's for another video. Thank you all for sticking around. If you'd be so kind, like the video, subscribe, comment, share, you know, all the algorithm BS, you know this. Bye. I am aware of the theory that Super Earth let the Terminids lose so they have an enemy for the population to hate for more control, but it backfires and we have this whole mess. I mean, I guess. I just don't buy that Super Earth would purposely destroy like a fifth of their colonial infrastructure and population. That is a lot of workers, and human lives don't come cheap, as well as destroy so much of their fuel production they have to send in the military to kill more things because they are about to run out. And then there's the part of the theory that goes a step further and says that the government is in complete control of the entire galactic war and there's no real threat at all. And that's just boring and lame. That would honestly make me want to stop playing the game. That's it, video done. Okay, bye. Oh, just one more thing. Arrowhead, please stop releasing stuff. Alright, I'm gonna run through this real quick. Escalation of Freedom, Impaler. New old enemy, not surprised with its return, another genetic mutation. Interestingly, it looks exactly the same as it did in the first game, so maybe the bugs are evolving backwards. Back to crabs. I already see people complaining about this. Trust me, once you figure them out, it won't be that bad. Just shoot in the face. It's that easy, bro. Skill issue. I'm not just like the rest of you. I'm stronger, I'm smarter, I'm better. I have the pre-order. The Brood Alpha Commander has been blacked. So already it's taking traits from the first game's Brood Commander and maybe evolving traits backwards into Crustaceans again.
Krill your shell.
Probably has medium armor, more health, especially in his spawns. Probably has extra armor. It'll probably deal more damage, and it wouldn't surprise me if it played acid as well. Spore Charger, just another mutation. Won't be the last one to see. Nice to see them moving more towards variants instead of just direct upgrades for new enemies. And the larva you grab is without a doubt Hive Lord larva, but the boss fights probably won't come anytime soon. There's gonna be more enemies and missions we haven't seen. Probably won't do a follow-up video for this because the important part was all the Helldivers 1 info, unless they drop an encyclopedia, which I think they actually might do, and it contains like humongous bombshells that change absolutely everything. Spore spewers the size of skyscrapers. Irregular spore readings. What, is the fog coming?